Good evening. It's been fun to get to chat with some of you today, and I even have, not to embarrass you, Deb, but I even have a member of my launch team from my book here today, which is always fun. Yes. Hi, Deb. You can raise your hand if you want to. Only if you want to. It is so fun, and it's just such it's an honor to get to be in different spaces and just to hear about different communities and the work they're doing, the unique folks who live within it, and how places like Samaritan is working to meet those needs. I think that's a really beautiful thing. I think part of the reason I do the work I do is to help resource folks, to have more to pull from so that in different experiences that come up in life as we all face hardship, that they would have it. And so, yeah, just a little thought to say it's good to be here. How many of you were here at the earlier session? Okay, lots of you were, which is awesome. Well, that's great, because I'm going to be building on a lot of what we talked about earlier. I'm still going to be referring to some parts almost like it's new, just because I think some of these concepts, I think sometimes we learn cognitively first, but my deep hope is that ultimately they become embodied. And it's that difference, like I talked about in the earlier session, that difference of knowing about something versus knowing something experientially, holding that thing in your body. That kind of knowledge is a different kind of knowledge. And I think that we need more of it, particularly in this day and age that we are in. So a couple things I just want to remind you of. We are going to be talking about, I think this session for me is an incredibly hopeful session. I think I love to talk about this reality that we can heal. Like that it is possible to heal and to work through hard things. And so we're going to be talking about that, but because we're also talking about things like trauma, I also just want to encourage you to remember if you need to take a break, if you need to get a drink of water, if you need to go to the back of the room, I really want you to be able to do that and to listen to your own body as we talk about this. So let's see here. So this is one of my favorite verses, and I have said it a lot in my adult life. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And this verse has come to be really meaningful when I talk about the work that we're going to be touching on tonight, which is this idea of compassionate resourcing. And I'm going to tie in the ways that I believe goodness is connected to this concept of resourcing. But for now, I hope what begins to be clear is how much this is not an accident. Like, it's not an accident that we are made for goodness. It's not an accident that we are made for wholeness. Paul talks about how all creation groans. Like, it is in us. It is at a body level, we groan for healing and wholeness. And that's actually a good thing, because it speaks to, it is like a beacon that tells us, if we have the ears to hear and the eyes to listen, where we might go. And so we're gonna unpack that a little bit more. So we talked about this earlier, the flow of strength, and we're gonna get into it a little bit more. But to demonstrate this a little bit more deeply, because in the earlier session, I wanted to make sure we didn't go too far over time. But as a reminder, so situational strength is sort of a survival strength. Transitional strength is when that top of our brain is starting to come back online. We're starting to pick up some cues of safety. And then the integrated strength is a sense of sort of like completion. There's a sense where we have the fullness of ourselves available to us, the thing that maybe felt like it was in process. We're able to learn from it. We're able to reflect on it. So I'd love to tell you a story from my own life that I hope just gives you a little bit of a picture of maybe what this might look like. As I've shared with you, I'm a survivor of complex trauma, and one of the ways that I survived was I became really good at basketball. And I had like this little fiery, tenacious part of me who, growing up in my house, there wasn't really space for me to have much of a voice. I didn't have the ability to set boundaries with my dad, who was really abusive. It was a very difficult place to be a kid. And so what I learned pretty early on is to channel that feeling of sometimes rage into places like the basketball court. And so what happened was that as I grew, sometimes people didn't know where I got my fire from. Like, they couldn't quite figure out how this little scrawny 10-year-old girl, like, what is she doing going tracking down grown men to play pickup basketball all the time? And I just share that to say, like, I loved basketball. I really did. But I also there was something about it that it was one of the only places in my life where I could allow myself to just really take up some space. And I could really, like it was okay and even praised to bring that fire. And especially as a woman, there was just like this very narrow place. And I just happened to find it. And I'm so glad I did. I feel like it was a gift to me that I found basketball. But as my life progressed, I went on to play college basketball and had a fairly successful career. The story I told earlier, my basketball career had just ended. And so I kind of didn't know. I was trying to figure out who I was without basketball, a little bit in a sense too. But part of what happened as I got older and as I went into my career as a therapist, and I went to seminary. Well, that happened before I became a therapist. But all these things, for a season of my life, I began to fear the fire in me. I began to feel like anytime I connected with that fire, what it did is it reminded me of the feeling that came up in my house when it felt like things were life or death. Because sometimes they kind of were. Because that was the fire, that was the audacity required to survive. And so when I tapped into that fire, it made me afraid. Because I felt a little bit like, oh, but that's not who I am. Like, I'm a therapist. I'm calm. Or like, no, I don't want to be seen as, whatever the versions of like, you're too loud, you take up too much space, all these different things. So I became ambivalent towards this part of myself that helped me survive. So for many, many years, I would say I've been in my own recovery process from complex trauma for about 17 years. And I would say the last probably 13 years have been a really intentional realization of like my own story, doing a lot of my own therapy, all of those things. So I've been doing some work for a little while. So back in 2018, I got a letter, and I was invited to come back to my old high school to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Because I'm still the highest leading scorer from my high school basketball. And so in 2018, I had just turned in my very first book manuscript for Try Softer. Like literally, like 8 hours before I got on the flight was like push and send. And I was tired. But so I go to the Pacific Northwest, and I had been in process for a while, doing this work, doing lots of self-compassion, therapy, body-centered work. I was in it, But I didn't expect what happened when I was there. And if you've read the book, you might know this, so spoil alert, but because I talk about this. But when I was there, I experienced this profound sense, in a way that I never had before, of integration in myself and with my younger self. That part of myself that I had felt so ambivalent towards, And really, when I talk about that, you can almost think about that like situational strength. One part, because there are multiple parts of myself that have had to be situationally strong, but this part had a very specific job, right? So I think of her, and it's like all the work came and bloomed. I had set the table, and it was like my body was ready to say, yeah, you know what? We can connect in a way that was not available to me 5 years before, 3 years even before. And so it was this really sweet experience for me where it was a true homecoming for multiple elements of who I am, that I got to go back and honor that younger self, who I am so proud of. I'm so proud of that part of myself who had the audacity to find a way to survive, to heal. And in doing that, what has been so cool, and I hope this is what you learn from Strong Like Water. I hope it's even what you'll get as we talk about this tonight. Because what I believe happens in this process is those things that oftentimes start as situational strength, as we have the resources, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight, the safety and the resources to heal, our body is able to metabolize the pain. It's almost like sloughing off. We don't have to keep the pain. It doesn't have to live in you always. But here's what you do get to keep. Everything you learned, that's yours. Like every way that you survive, all the gold, all the ways that make you be like, how in the world did I get through that thing? That's yours. And I think this is honestly beautiful, because I cannot tell you how common, I'm telling you my story, but I think my story is representative of a lot of people's stories. People have their own versions of ways they got through things. But when people say, wow, that's amazing, they say, oh, can we not? I don't want to talk about that. And I get that. And I think it's important for us to honor, like, it's just because something's impressive doesn't mean like we need to always go there. But I think the process of healing also helps us experience a sense of connection with ourselves, and often even the ways that I think sometimes in the process of not wanting to get lost in our trauma, it's like we throw the baby out with the bathwater. We disconnect from parts of our stories that are yours. Like, they are God-given. Those are, like, it's a gift that your body could adapt. It's a gift that my body could adapt. And so this process, I think of that particular story as like a big picture of going from that situational strength, you spending a lot of time in transitional strength. Lots of resources have been and were needed in order for me to have the ability to fully come back to that part of my story from a place where it felt like completion. It felt like, okay, I did the best that I could. There are things I wish that could have been different, but that's how it happened. And I love my younger self, and I love who I am now. And so let's talk about this compassionate resourcing a little bit more, and what that meant and what that means. So I love the work of Dr. Arielle Schwartz. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she is a psychologist, and she does a lot around complex trauma, body-centered work. She has some fabulous resources, just to put a plug in for her. But I really appreciate Dr. Arielle Schwartz. And one of the things that she talks about with resources is that a resource is anything that communicates safety to our bodies in the present. So if we go back here to situational strength, part of what we're saying there is that the resources that we may need in that experience might look different than the resources you need in integrated strength. or they may need to be built upon. Like when you are in situational strength, this is when we are only in our survival brain. And so from that place, we're basically just going off the default modes in our bodies. Like our body's just like, I'm going to do whatever I got to do. I don't really have much choice. So when we're talking about resources there, a lot of times I will teach folks concepts like grounding. I don't know if folks are familiar with that concept, but that's using our 5 senses to come back into the present moment. This is one of the things that I teach people almost always. Like if you've heard me on a podcast, if you've heard me almost anywhere, I will probably talk about grounding. And the reason is because it's really accessible. And also, I don't assume that folks always have the ability to get those basic levels of safety. Sometimes people have lived their whole life, never knowing what it's like to experience safety in their bodies. And so this idea of grounding, in fact, let's just take a moment, because I love experiential things. And just even in the place where you are in this moment, I just want to invite you to just kind of get settled in your seat a little bit. And some of you have already done this, but let's just do it here in this present moment to kind of build on it. So as you're able, I want you to just take a moment and notice the floor beneath you. Notice if that feels soft or hard. Notice if there's any textures or height variation as you put your feet on the ground. And then I want you to just notice the lighting in the space, if you want to open your eyes. Just taking that in, noticing that. Notice if there's something that you can touch with your hands. And what's the texture that you're bringing in? Yeah. Notice if there is a place in your body that feels neutral. So sometimes I might say like your kneecaps or your elbows or the top of your ears. And we're just looking, again, we're kind of just looking for neutrality here as you do this. Notice if there's anything here that you can smell. And then finally, notice if there's anything you can hear. And then as you're able, I want to just invite you to kind of come back to the room, come back to the space. And just in your own self, what are you noticing? Just observe that. So this is a practice that, honestly, if you're going into situational strength, I highly recommend. And really just as something that you can build on. And if you can get outside when you're doing that, it's even better. But in general, part of what we're doing, and this is what I talk about in Strong Like Water, is that the goal of this whole work is that it's meant to be, ultimately we're meant to be dynamic. And here's what I mean by that. A picture of health in this work is not that we're like Zen, we're totally calm in the face of danger. That is not necessarily a picture of nervous system health. Instead, what we're looking for is a nervous system that will respond accurately to what's in front of us. So if you are in danger, my goodness, I pray that you are able to access your situational strength. If you are about to get hit by a car, let's get out of there. If someone is being abusive to you, man, let's access that and get right out of there. Like this is, again, I talked about this in the first session. This is a gift of God, that our bodies are able to adapt. And we could actually say that being able, like if you are being harmed and you are reacting as though you're being harmed, you're reacting appropriately. That's what health means. And as we heal, what begins to happen is those misattunements that we sometimes have, where I don't know why I always come up with this example, but you're in the grocery store and maybe it's because of a reflection of my own life. You're in the grocery store and you're like getting anxious, or you're flushed because things feel like it's too small, or you're having panic. But you're noticing like, oh, I actually am safe. That misattunement to the situation. Ultimately, this kind of work is aiming to help our bodies live in alignment with what's actually in front of us. That itself is the goal. So when we talk about this idea of compassionate resourcing, what we're saying is that as we experience levels of safety, which in my books, I'm able to spend more time talking about this, but I talk quite a bit about attachment. And I talk about the role of things like attachment and connection in our development of safety. And what we're meant to experience is a level of good enough parenting, a level of essentially good enough safety. When we have a level of good enough safety, we begin to internalize it. And then we carry that framework around with us. But some of us didn't have that. Or some of us had that, but that got impaired. It got impaired later. Like maybe there was enough safety in your home, but then you were a part of a system or an organization or a cultural experience, something that's happened to you in our culture, and it messed with the safety. And it made it difficult to access that. So then you find your body constantly hanging out in situational strength. And you're constantly walking around feeling like it's a life or death situation when it's not. And that's how we know. I mean, as you're listening and you're wondering about this for your own life and your own curiosity, I think one of the biggest things I could say is that if it feels like there's that constant life or death experience, that's probably the thing that is most indicative of the fact that there may be something there that needs your attending. It needs something. There's some compassion that's needed from that. So one of the things, a quote that I love, do y'all know Wendell Berry at all? I love this quote of his because he talks about this reality of what does it mean to practice resurrection. And when I think about this work of compassionate resourcing, which essentially, again, it's a way that we're offering safety to our body, I think there's a really important sort of crossover with this idea that in a way this is a form of resurrection. And what I mean by that is that, there are so many ways that situational strength often is meant to keep us safe. But when it's not able to get worked through our body in the ways that it needs, it sort of becomes sort of bondage a little bit. It becomes, I'm not choosing to have to live my life like this, but I'm still having to. And so when we get to experience safety and goodness and that compassionate resourcing, it's a form of grace. And it's a form of, I think, a reflection almost of God's goodness to us, that there's a form of resurrection to that. That thing that we thought was going to die in us, the hope. I think about that young me. The young me who played basketball, who gave everything that she had, and then for 10 years couldn't access that part of myself. That felt like death. That felt like grief to have that part of my story. but getting to turn towards that with compassion and safety and allowing that to bloom, to not have to be ashamed of that part of myself, but to allow it to become the fullness of myself, my God-given self, just like you have a God-given self, just like you and I, we were all designed for fullness. And so, as we talk about this, I would love to just read a bit of a section from Strong Like Water that talks about this concept because, well, I love it. A resurrection hope. All glimmers and resources are reminders of the witness and witness of a God who loves us madly. My friend and fellow therapist, Dr. Allison Cook, compares the idea of glimmers to hope, not only in everyday life, but also as it's demonstrated in the Bible. I happen to agree with her that whether goodness comes through common or specific grace, it is a form of tangible hope. And as the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 5:3, we can glory in, not because of, our suffering, knowing that because God is with us, God can cause even those things that have harmed us to develop our endurance, character, and hope. And here's possibly my favorite part. This hope does not put us to shame. Paul points to this paradoxical hope, this strength like water that becomes embedded in the core of who we are when he writes, "We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. And that's from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 through 10. When Paul speaks about the death of Jesus, perhaps he is pointing to the fact that Jesus' willingness to come for us and sacrifice himself for us is profound evidence of our belovedness. I love the phrasing, "we always carry around in our body," because we now understand that we carry trauma and pain around in our body like a story. How fitting then that we are invited to carry around in our bodies a love that does not disappoint or put us to shame. This is how we come alive. As my friend and fellow therapist Ryan Kuja writes, resurrection is in our cells. Every time we help our body feel safe, we are practicing hope and resurrection. Every time we turn with compassion to ourselves and others, we, as Wendell Berry says, practice resurrection. Every time we feel the sun on our cheeks and the wind in our hair and the breath in our lungs, when we laugh at a joke or feel the embrace of people who love us, we are practicing the brave work of resurrection. In a world where there is so much pain and destruction, seeing resurrection is no small thing. So I think one of the reasons why there's just so much beauty to this work, but also I think there's a lot of practicality, is that the beauty, there's lots of levels, but I think about this particularly from a faith lens, from the Christian faith tradition. I think about this as co-creating and co-working with God, with the author of compassion and healing, in the work of restoration, in the work of wholeness. And I think oftentimes we get this a little bit, like my experience, and maybe y'all have a different experience. So if you do, I bless that. But my experience often in the Christian tradition is that we miss this reality of this participation element. That oftentimes we experience things as like it's done to us. Like, here's your healing, that's it. Here, I'm going to hand you this and you just take it, right? But I love the story of Jesus healing the blind man, right? And he puts the mud, he has him put the mud on his eyes, and then he goes and washes it off. And I love this because I just have to think, like, Jesus could have just, maybe it would have just been simpler, right? Jesus just like, you're healed, you're good, just go ahead on your way. But there's something here that's really important about this idea of participating with, right? And I think this also speaks to this deeper reality that healing begets healing, that we begin to heal, and then oftentimes what we find is that our healing overflows and spills over into the experience with other people. And I love the verse when Jesus tells us to love our neighbor as ourselves, because I think this is a really elegant example of how healing is both individual and it's also communal. That when we participate in being loved, we have a deeper capacity to offer love to our neighbor as ourselves, right? And so all of this work is, I see this as, again, it's that flow versus this like stagnant, like here's this one thing for all time. Here's your life hack. Here's your ticket to get out of this. And instead, we learn to participate with God, with each other, as we continue in this work. So one of the things, I don't know if you remember from earlier today, I was talking a little bit about the vagus nerve, if you recall that. So I don't know about you, but I'm curious. When you think about things like safety, or goodness, or beauty, or maybe even hope, if there's just like a little part of you that's like, that's nice, get to the real stuff. Like where's your real advice? Where's the thing that's actually gonna make a difference? Maybe that's not you, but there's a part of me that's like that. There's a part of me that dismisses goodness, and I think about that, and I think part of that is wired into us, but we're designed to kind of make sure that we have our eye out for threat. But I also think, especially if you have a history of trauma in your life, that we get really shaped this way. That we get shaped to be like, oh, I don't have time for that. Oh, I can't do that thing. Oh, there's no time for me to take care of myself. I have to get, the deadline has to be done. These things have to be met. And part of why I love that this work is a paradox. Maybe you've noticed that there's a lot of paradoxes here. Because what I have found, and I see this in polyvagal theory, I see this in the window of, when we talk about interpersonal neurobiology through like the window of tolerance, we see this in attachment theory, we see this in self-compassion work, we see this in the Christian tradition. That it's things like love and safety that make us the most strong. So let's talk about why that is. And part of that is because this vagus nerve that we talked about, so that's the longest cranial nerve in your body. It's huge, and it spans all the way from your face all the way down through your gut. And it is very influential in shifting your nervous system states. And the upper half of your vagus nerve is the part that we really tap into when we feel like ourselves, when we feel like we sort of have all the connection to who we really are. So this part of ourself, this vagus nerve, when we experience enough safety, like particularly, let's say, like in childhood, but also as we grow in our relationships, in the life experiences we have, we develop what's called a vagal brake. Now, the vagal brake basically is the thing. Like when I talk about that line between that situational and that transitional strength, or when we think about it through the lens of like the window of tolerance, the vagal brake is the thing that makes you be able to be like, oh, that scared me, but it's okay, that was just my friend being weird. I'm good, I'm fine, right? Oh, that was a really loud noise. Oh, but I can see that it was just that door, okay. This is the part of our physiology that when we talk about things like widening the window of tolerance, when we talk about the ability to increase our distress tolerance, when we talk about the ability to have more capacity to process our emotions, it is all related to this very concept. And basically it's this, that when we are in an experience or having a sensation or anything like that, that has the potential to feel threatening to our body, if it's not actually threatening, it inhibits the stress response, meaning it keeps us connected to the window of tolerance, to ourselves, to more of our integrated fullness of ourselves. And so what I think is fascinating about this, it's sort of like, I think a lot of times we think about safety and I see it all over the place. Like there are so many themes, and it goes right along with like this idea of how people think it's pain that makes us strong, right? Like this is so common. How many times have you experienced or heard in your own life this idea of like no pain, no gain? Or gosh, if this is gonna just work out to just teach you so much, and everything happens for a reason, and let's just put a bow on it, right? Because it's all gonna work out. I get it. Like I get where those come from, and I don't mean to shame anyone, but what I would say is that it is not pain that makes us strong. It is safety. It is our body's ability after difficulty to reconnect to a sense of safety that brings us back to ourselves and that allows us to ultimately move through difficulty. Now, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the name Alan Shore. Have you heard of that name? Famous, I forget if he's I think he's a psychologist, but he's just done some beautiful work. But one of his quotes that is really, I have benefited from so much, he talks about that it's the repair with kiddos that makes them strong. It's not the pain. And he's talking about that in context of like a parent-child relationship. He talks about how when a kiddo experiences something difficult or even difficult with the relationship with their parent, when the parent repairs, what ultimately ends up happening is oftentimes that creates resilience in the kiddo.